Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duds. Today we're studying Judges chapter 21. Let's get started.
Okay, so if you have not noticed, I've got some good news for you, that the Judges chapter 21 is the very last chapter of the book of Judges. And so we're going to move on from here today, but this is a good book where it's given us a lot to really think about. I mentioned yesterday at church, and maybe you remember this, Judges makes us uncomfortable because these are the people of God living inside the land of God, supposedly under the rule of God, but they fail multiple times throughout this book to look anything like the one that they say they worship. And so what happens in this book makes us uncomfortable with that because we know that there have been times when we have not represented him well, we have not done what we're supposed to, and we hope nobody was watching. But in this case, as is probably our case, somebody is watching. And our role in the world is to be light to the world. We're supposed to be salt. We're supposed to be all of these things. But when we start looking more like the world rather than the kingdom, we got some major problems. Now, let me just kind of throw some things out there to kind of put all this in perspective. Jesus talked about his people, and he talked about his people being the salt of the earth. Salt is that which preserves, it's that which cleans, it's that which purifies, it's that which seasons. But what good is salt that has lost its saltiness? Do you know that? No. What does Jesus say that salt that loses its savor, what is it good for? He said it's just good to be thrown out and be trampled on by people. When you're reading the book of Judges, over and over again, what's the theme of this book? That the people increasingly did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And what happened? Their enemies came down on them, oppressed them, hurt them, persecuted them, pushed them out. If we put that in Jesus' illustration, they were cast out and trodden over by their enemies. The salt had lost its savor. Now, there's a reason for this. We talked about this on Sunday. The reason and the summation for all that happens in this book comes in one line, and it was John's big takeaway of the day. John, what you got?
Okay, so the very last verse of the book of Judges says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes."
Okay.
And so that verse is super important because when it says everyone did what was right in his own eyes, it's saying basically the people were doing the wrong thing, because if they're doing what's right in their eyes, they're not doing what's right in God's eyes. And so basically they were just doing, the wrong thing and sinning.
That's right. Okay, so let's flesh out what that means because it helps explain the book. So inside the people of God, the divine order, okay? Now when we say that, here's what we mean. The rule and reign of Almighty God, King of the universe, is supposed to be ruling and reigning in our hearts, which then affect our lives. But when there is no divine order, it's chaos. That's why in this book you've got judge after judge, you've got person after person, you've got Levite after Levite, you've got all this, and it's all in chaos. Why? Because the divine order is breaking down. And when this divine order begins to break down, go back to the story of Micah, right? In chapter 17. The household is breaking down. The family is breaking down. Society is breaking down. Their mission to the nations is breaking down. Why? Because the rule of God that's supposed to be handed down from his commandments to his law, his structure, his precepts, his statutes, all the way God has told his people to live. When that's been thrown out the window, and now our own hearts, which are what we want, what we think, what we say, what we desire, when all of that stuff supersedes everything God said, it's chaos. Now, at the end of chapter number 21, you've got the end of Israel's civil war. Okay, so the Benjaminites have been virtually destroyed. There's only like 600 of these guys out of the other 11 tribes with multi-thousands of them. All but about 600, right, are dead. They have been judged. They have been defeated. And then you see glimpses of people like, okay, maybe we got to get this right. So they build an altar, they make sacrifices, they make peace offerings. Now, there's no explicit way of saying that they actually repented. But they did at least go through the motions, which I'm going to take that as a step forward. Okay? We also recognize that what's happening in this chapter is the Israelites look at how much they've lost. And by the way, the old preachers would say that sin will always take you further than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. So the Israelites are looking at the civil war caused by the chaos they've allowed into their community. And they go, this has cost us too much. It has cost us one of the 12 tribes. They said, if we don't get these guys, these 600 guys, some wives, they're not going to have children, and they're going to be gone once these guys are gone. And they said the problem is, number one, we've got a law that says we're not allowed to marry outside the tribe. Now they're trying to pay attention to laws. We also have an agreement that none of us who were mad at them originally, we agreed. We weren't giving any of them our daughters as their wives. So where do we get wives for these guys? Well, their plan was, we're going to go attack a neighboring community who did not join in, and as restitution, not only are they going to die, but we're going to take the young ladies and give them to these guys. You go, hey, man, of all the godly things that could come out of this, that doesn't sound like it, right? And the other side of this is then they go, well, we didn't get enough wives after that one. By the way, people are still dying, and these poor girls, right? Then they decide to go back to a strategy. So when I was in like 5th or 6th grade, I don't remember, we watched a movie in school. It was an old musical, and it was called Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and it was about these guys that lived out in the woods, and they wanted to get married, but nobody would marry them because they were kind of wild. So they went to a community dance, and they found the 7 prettiest girls they could find, and they ran in the dance, and they grabbed them, and they took them home, and they married them. And it's a lighthearted musical, and I'm looking back on it now, and I'm like, oh gosh, they kidnapped those girls, right? So it's all fun and games. So you read it and you go, that's exactly what this sounds like. They sent these guys into a community dance, a festival, and they kidnapped their wives and took them home. And then the guys, the rest of the community told the fathers and the brothers of these kidnapped girls, they were like, hey, you didn't technically give them away to be married to these guys. Just let it go. I mean, we gotta preserve them, and everybody just seems to be okay. Okay, let me give you a takeaway. So all throughout this book, there's been a major collapse in the moral character of his people, right? Of God's people. But in this story, I want you to see something about there's a massive gap between what is godly and wise and what is strategic and scheming. Now, you can make decisions, but they're going to fall somewhere on this spectrum. Sometimes you are going to have decisions and you're going to make them and you're going to go, this sounds logical. We have found a loophole. If we can just do it this way, it will all work out and we will all be happy because we have found the loophole. But it won't be godly and it won't be wise. Sometimes what is godly and wise will not make sense to our brains because we're supposed to be walking in faith. But it'll be right. There is a difference in right and wrong, even if what's on paper is wrong but looks easy. Let me tell you this. There are very rarely any shortcuts to godliness. Usually the path of godliness is a path where you take up your own cross daily and you follow him. It's a path where you have to deny yourself. It is a path of sacrifice. It is a path of faithfulness, and it's not easy, but it's right. You get to the end of Judges and you go, these folks are now talking about making sacrifices, but they're still acting selfishly and in the flesh. They're not finished with their sin yet. Now here's where you're going to stop off. You have 2 rays of hope when you finish the book of Judges. The first ray of hope is if you turn one more page, you're going to be in the book of Ruth. Ruth happens in the time of the Judges, where there is a rich, wealthy, wise, good, godly man from Bethlehem who is ready to marry an outsider named Ruth, and he changes her life. It's the gospel. That happens in that time. God hasn't forgotten his people. He gave them a beautiful picture of his grace in that story. The next ray of hope is that once now you're out of the season of the judges, Saul is going to step up. But here's what I'll say. It's also time for David. And once David comes on the scene, a man after God's own heart, changes begin. And so when you're approaching life, you can do life like the world, or you can do life like the kingdom. They're very rarely ever going to cross paths. But you got to decide how you're going to live. The judges tell us that even great strength, great power, great skill isn't always used godly. But the meek, the humble, they can be used. And so, choose you this day how you're going to live your life. I think that's the book of Judges makes us self-examine that stuff. We'll see you tomorrow as we move on to our next book. See you then. Bye.
Bye.